Ladies and gentlemen, let's game into the video. While there is certainly a lot of news in the tech industry popping up from AMD, mostly of course because of their new GPU architecture known as Polaris, as well as the upcoming CPU architecture known as Zen, it's not to say that their rivals are resting on their laurels. Oh no, 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 no. Both Intel and Nvidia are of course hard at work producing their own next generation of components, and we're going to be discussing just those companies in this video. We're going to start out things with Intel, then we're going to mosey on over to Nvidia land, where everything is shiny and rosy. Well, maybe not shiny and rosy, but it's coming on quite well. So, starting out with Intel, as I've mentioned, it's been kind of a bit of a setback for Intel over the past few years. As we all know, process sizes didn't shrink as fast as they wanted, and unfortunately in Intel's case they have not suffered from shrinkage. So Cannonlake CPUs are going to be succeeded by 10nm IceLake families. Intel definitely have a thing for lakes, don't they? And that's going to happen in 2018, and then finally we should be seeing TigerLake, which sounds pretty damn vicious, to be honest with you. Imagine a lake of tigers. That doesn't sound very pleasant at all. That will happen in 2019, and that also will be 10nm. So why is that? Well, essentially speaking, it's the issue with tick and tock. So tick is a smaller process node which is really almost an update of the existing architecture which is around. It's been this way for some time now in the tech industry. We've known about it for years, and unfortunately it's not quite going as what it used to be. Now we're seeing an additional TOC than what we were. Now TOC is a brand new architecture that's built on the existing process. So in other words, it typically speaking would be like a transition from like 40nm downwards to say 32. However, now we're starting to see a third TOC which is being introduced into the mix. Now this third TOC will add a few extra features, but it's not really a complete refresh. It's not an entire new microarchitecture. You can think about Intel's Broadwell CPUs as a tick, whereas Skylake was a TOC, and KBLake is also yet another TOC. Simply because if you were to look at the feature set that, let's say, Broadwell brought to the table, obviously it's 14nm, Skylake was a TOC, and then you see KBLake, which, as we know from the details that have already leaked concerning KBLake, it's not really a hop, skip and a jump away from what Intel have already put out with Skylake. So let's discuss this a little further with a quote from Intel themselves. To address this, Candice, in the second half of 2016, we plan to introduce a third 14nm product, or nanometer if you wanted verbatim, product codenamed KBLake, built on the foundations of the Skylake microarchitecture, but with key performance enhancements. Then, in the second half of 2017, we expect to launch our first 10nm product, codenamed Cannonlake. We expect that this addition to the roadmap will deliver new features and improved performance and pave the way for a smooth transition to 10nm. So we already know, thanks to this quote, that 10nm Cannonlake is essentially locked in for the second half of 2017, but a report has now popped up on HW Battle, which is indicating that Intel will once again be introducing the 10nm IceLake in 2018, and then that will be succeeded by 10nm TigerLake in 2019, which is kind of cool. From what we can tell, Cannonlake is going to be designed on a completely new node, but it looks like most of the inner workings are going to be from KBLake, so it's really going to be IceLake that we're going to be seeing a brand new architecture as a whole. So I wouldn't like to say it's new money for old rope from, for example, KBLake, but it's not a massive increase in performance. That doesn't mean that we won't start seeing additional CPU cores. It doesn't mean that necessarily we won't get improvements to performance or improvements in clock speed or power consumption. It just means that it's going to be a refinement of what we've already got, which is okay. It should mean quite an interesting battle, however, from AMD and Nvidia, AMD and Intel, simply because from what we understand from the Zen release, which hopefully should be later this year, we should, a year or two later on, then see the next generation Zen, which is very much a refinement of the current Zen architecture, just with improvements to IPC, maybe slight improvements to clock speed, maybe better power consumption, whatever else AMD managed to squeeze out of it. It should be quite cool, particularly from what we're hearing regarding CPU cores. We know that there's going to be a whole bunch of CPU cores packed into the Zen architecture. Rumors have it, from what we're hearing, that we should see up to 16 threads for the high-end desktop devices. So how Intel managed to counter that with, let's say, the IceLake or whatever else, or even KV-Lake for that matter, it should be kind of cool. Now, finally, I'll leave you with one last other tidbit of information from Intel before we jump to Nvidia, and that is TSMC are working on the production of 7nm as we speak. This is according to the company, the co-CEO of TSMC, Mark Liu. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Liu. And this was during a recent investors meeting, and they also mentioned that they are now ready to jump to 5nm using extreme ultraviolet lithography. To be honest, I'm not too familiar with how that works, so I'm going to do some reading up on it in my own time. But we're not really sure how a lot of that is going to work, because from what we understand, it would appear that yes, they are starting to do some of this stuff, but we're not quite sure whether it's going to be, how can I put it, whether it's going to be exploratory or whether they're going to actually have volume productions within those time periods. It's also, I'm guessing, around the time of 2020, which is when Intel are saying that they're going to hit the green light for 7nm. It probably won't be much after that silicon won't really remain in our future. Because at the end of the day, and I'm sure most of you who are interested in technology know about this anyway, we're kind of at a good relationship with silicon for a number of years, and by a number of years I mean, well, pretty much since the dawns of computers, but it and we are having to go our separate ways, unfortunately. It just can't keep going how it is. And there are various methods and technologies, of course, which we're exploring, and a lot of them sound kind of cool, and we've managed to improve the manufacturing of these processes, but as essentially the space that we're dealing with get tinier and tinier and tinier and tinier, we can't keep doing it. So it's eventually going to be one of those things. But anyway, moving on to Nvidia. So Nvidia, of course, are working on their Pascal architecture, which eventually will be succeeded with Volta. Pascal, as you know, is going to be produced as the successor to the current Maxwell architecture, which was rather successful. Maybe not a massive improvement in terms of performance. So let's say compared to like the 680 to the 780 to the 980, there's not a huge jump there, but it was still a reasonable, and the 980 Ti in particular has been pretty damn successful. The GTX 970 once again has been extremely popular with gamers, offering a pretty damn good price-performance ratio. So obviously Nvidia are looking to enter mass production, however, for the Pascal GPUs with high bandwidth memory too. When? Well, theoretically it should be available in the second half of 2016. This is according to Digital Times. Now they're reporting from what their sources are telling them that, and this obviously comes on the back of what we were discussing yesterday with Samsung, where now they're starting to mass produce HBM2 DRAM. That would be Samsung with the 4GB DRAM packages, which obviously are going to be critical for the next generation GPUs, whether it's Nvidia or AMD. it's going to be kind of cool because mass production for these chips is now started. Nvidia are, at least once again, rumoured to start mass producing the next generation GPUs, Pascal, in this year, the first half. So availability, in other words, we should be able to mosey on into a store at some point late 2016 without too much problem. Now, we all know that there are a multitude of different packages available for Pascal, and Nvidia, much like AMD, are spouting that they will have a maximum capacity of up to 32 gigabytes for the highest end card. It's a little weird because it's rumoured that Nvidia are testing at 16nm. There's less details regarding AMD and how they stack up. From what I'm hearing, it's 14nm, but there is still some ambiguity there regarding what is going to be what. Nvidia's lineup, however, much like AMD, will be a mixture of GDDR5 and HBM2, but once again, we don't know where the cutoff periods are, and by which I mean, for the sake of this models, let's say for the sake of argument, let's cut the Titans out of it for the sake of this video. Let's just say that they don't exist, and let's just focus on the GTX 970, 980, 960, and let's say the 980 Ti. So we can almost unequivocally say that the GTX 980, the 980 Ti definitely, and maybe the 980 will have HBM too, but will the GTX 970? We just don't know yet. Obviously, we can just increment that for the next generation GPUs. Now, obviously these cards will be monsters, and very much like the AMD alternative, it will have up to 1 terabyte per second of memory bandwidth, which is absolutely gargantuan when you think about it. It's not really known how all of this is going to work in reality, because what we do know is that it's going to have up to 17 billion transistors. That's been a figure that's been touted for some time now, and honestly it's kind of a PR number, because a transistor, the number of transistors, is kind of like saying, well, I wouldn't like to say it's the megahertz myth or anything like that, because the number of transistors doesn't necessarily equal to a faster product. Because let's say, for the sake of argument, GPUs have a lot more transistors in it than a lot of modern CPUs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're better, it just means they're faster at certain things. For the sake of argument, a lot of the space on a CPU goes into logic. It goes into actually being able to make decisions rather than how a GPU works, where a lot of that space goes to actually extra processors. Now, what we are aware of from Nvidia, and this is something they've been extremely boastful of, they are going to be focusing on compute performance, floating point performance, and this should theoretically mean FP64, which was an area that we all know Maxwell was not really where we expected it to be, and it was getting absolutely hammered when it come to DX12 because of some of this. It's going to be kind of cool. Now, which GPU is going to launch first? Is it going to be Polaris? Is it going to be Pascal? I don't know. Is it going to be the Battle of the P's? I think it's fair to say that it's going to be interesting, because let's say, for the sake of argument, that you're upgrading your PC when the next generation GPUs have come out. Let's say you've got a fairly decent system now. Let's say you've got something along the lines of an R9 290, or you've got a GTX 780 Ti, or something like that. Something where you're like, yeah, okay, I'm pretty happy. It's not bleeding edge, but I'm pretty happy. You're going to be okay to play games at 1080p, 1440p for the foreseeable future. I mean, maybe the odd game you might have to turn down anti-aliasing, but I don't think there's going to be many this year that's going to struggle at 1440p for the foreseeable 6 months-ish that we're going to have to wait for these GPUs. Say 6 to 9 months. Let's say one of them is released, I'm going to pull a figure out of my arse and say August. We would then probably guess that the next one would be released, say, September. Once again, pulling out of my arse. Would you really want to buy in August to then potentially have a much better GPU released a month later or 2 months later. It's kind of hard because, yeah, there are going to definitely be some people who would do that. Reviewers, obviously, not a problem. If, however, you're not a reviewer and you're a tech enthusiast with a lot of money to burn, you're probably going to do it anyway. I know some people on forums that I frequent semi. Obviously, you've got NeoGAF. I don't post on NeoGAF, but I read it. You've got other ones like Overclockers UK and a few others that I used to post on. And I knew quite a few folks who would be like, yeah, okay, I'm going to upgrade to this GPU, and then they'd sell that GPU after they've played around with it, and they'd get another one, or they'd give it to their brother or their Uncle Bob or what have you. And that's just how they like to do things. They had disposable income. However, I imagine most of those people would be the minority for most gamers, and therefore if you're the kind of gamer who upgrades, let's say once every 18 months to 24 months, which I think is a pretty good sweet spot for most individuals to upgrade their GPUs. CPUs you can get certainly wait longer, maybe 3-4 years. I mean, let's say you bought the 2500K back in the day, you're pretty much laughing. If you bought a 2500, 2600K, you probably are pretty damn happy and pleased with yourself. But anyway, if you was to buy, let's say the Pascal released first, for sake of argument, in August, if let's say September rolls around and you knew AMD were going to release their GPU 3, 4, 5 weeks later, would you really want to upgrade to Pascal? If you're a massive Nvidia fan and you've got tons of money already invested into Nvidia hardware, let's say you've got the G-Sync monitors, you've got a couple of nice G-Sync monitors, you've got all the stuff that you need for that, let's say you've got the Nvidia streaming solutions, yeah, maybe you would just jump on the latest and greatest Nvidia card. But for everyone else, you're probably better off waiting, because it could be that the cards, even if you're stuck on Nvidia, even if you say, yeah, I don't want to move to anything else, even if you say, I don't want to move from AMD, but yeah, the prices will probably come down once you've got that competition. So it's going to be a very interesting summer/autumn, depending on when we see the release. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.